Gabriel, we both spend a lot of time, you on a Sunday, me through the week, following the Labour Party, speaking to shadow cabinet ministers and people around Keir Starmer, in the room with Keir Starmer. And I think it's fair to say we detect a mixture of excitement and trepidation, because if you look at the polls, they tell one story, which is Labour sort of freewheeling towards the finish line in 2024. But beneath the surface, there is anxiety that, one, they've not quite worked out how to nail Rishi Sunak, and two, the big economic questions have yet to be answered either.
I think that's right. I mean, obviously the clue's in the name. Keir Starmer's leader of the opposition. He's paid to oppose and critique the government, but in some ways, he's now shifted the onus, or he's basically stated that he's going to be a government. His party will be a government in waiting. So it's obviously incumbent on him to articulate what that means. And as you've outlined, he's been kind of conspicuously lacking in detail or a sort of economic perspective of his own. I was in the House of Commons last week speaking to Rachel Reeves, who, to her credit, has done a fine job of neutralising the Labour brand in the eyes of the city. She's, I think, a far more consummate political performer than her predecessor, whose clip you just played. But nevertheless, when asked, well, what is it that you would cut, or what taxes would you raise? They are the ones leading into the household metaphor for public finances. They're saying we need to balance the books. I think, they've got a long way to go now in articulating exactly what it is that they would do. And I mean, just to riff for one more moment on this theme of, going from opposition to government in waiting. I mean, we learned a lot in Keir Starmer's first 2 years about who he was not. He's definitely not Jeremy Corbyn. He's sure as hell not Boris Johnson either. And not being those two people was politically advantageous to him. But I think we are now in a very different era where we do need to know a lot more about what he does represent.
Because we know what Rishi Sunak represents to the Conservative Party in the country, which is fiscal rectitude. And in some respects, that's a tricky wicket for Labour to play, isn't it? Because as you say, you ask them, well, hang on, are you going to raise taxes or cut spending? And when Rishi Sunak proposes both of those things next month, are you going to support him or not? The answer comes that, one, it's not a decision for the Labour Party to make, as Margaret Beckett told me in the past 15 minutes or so. But also, insofar as there is an answer, they say, well, we'll abolish non-dom status, that'll raise a couple of billion quid, and then you get some blather about green energy investment. I don't think it's necessarily clear, is it, that they've made that decision yet, partly because it's a very politically painful choice for the Labour Party, as we saw in 2015. I wrote in the Times last week that 2015, the Labour Party promised to, cut as George Osborne was cutting, but slower. In 1997, Gordon Brown promised to stick to Ken Clarke's fiscal plans. It's always a tricky situation, isn't it, for the Labour Party to decide whether to deviate from a Tory party's fiscal baseline ahead of an election, because otherwise they can be pilloried, as Labour opposition so often are, as spendthrift and reckless with the economy.
That's right. I mean, just to add to your list of things that Labour say they do, they give a lot of oxygen to this idea they would somehow claw back billions from these PPE contracts gone wrong. I mean, speak to serious economists, and they say that's, the equivalent of looking for pennies down the back of the sofa. It's not going to plug a, multi-billion pound deficit or address our long-term debt to GDP issue. So as you say, I mean, they have to start articulating what their position is going to be. And I think, it is much more comfortable for Labour to inhabit a world where, have Boris Johnson making Pepper the Pig speeches to the CBI and a leader credited with saying F business, or Liz Truss presiding over a financial crisis. I mean, that is much safer terrain than Sunak coming in and, reinitiating an era of austerity, which is obviously politically unpalatable. And I think, the last 3 years have attested to the fact that most Brits want a larger and more interventionist state and feel, entitled to a degree of state protection. So I don't think that, the country is crying out for the fiscal rectitude embodied by Sunak. But at the same time, I think that Labour could be caught in a difficult position of, again, kind of having to do something to the effect of constructive government, where they say, well, we'd probably do something similar but maybe a bit different, but maybe in a slightly more Labour style way.
Well, now, you're listening to our big thing on the 1997 landslide and whether Labour can repeat it, or rather, what they need to do to repeat that 1997 result. Should they consider copying the Tony Blair playbook to beat Rishi Sunak? Indeed, can they beat Rishi Sunak? Well, Labour MP Ben Bradshaw was a minister in the Blair years and indeed came in. He won the seat of Exeter in that landslide in 1997. He joins me on the line now. Good morning, Ben.
Hello, Patrick.
We've been hearing this morning that Sir Keir Starmer, yes, is considerably ahead in the polls, but hasn't necessarily done everything. I think most people would say that is fair, even within the Labour Party, even his supporters, to prove that Labour are fully ready for government. Is now the time to follow where Tony Blair left off? We know that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown are advising Keir Starmer. Should he be copying that playbook, do you think?
Well, I mean, history never repeats itself in quite the same way. And of course, the challenges that we face now are some of the same ones, like the state of the health service and public services generally, but also they're very different. I mean, if there is an election and were we to win, we'd inherit an economic situation far, far worse than the one we inherited in 1997. And I think Keir and his top team are well aware of that. And you've already been seeing, I think, in recent weeks and months, a certain amount of expectation management. We already have the very strict fiscal rules that Rachel Reeves has imposed on all of her fellow shadow cabinet ministers. And I mean, that's very much like where we were pre-97, where our number one priority, having lost the public's trust in the 70s, 80s, on economic competence, and having done so again extremely badly under Jeremy Corbyn, have won that back. And I think that, along with asserting his authority over the party, has been one of Keir's most important and significant achievements. But I'm confident you're seeing more policy coming out. I suspect you'll get a bit like pre-97, some iconic policies that don't appear on the face of it to be terribly ambitious, but give the public an idea of how a Labour government would be different. And my hope would then be that when we're in power, also like 97, we do a lot more. I mean, we did a heck of a lot more in those governments after 97 than we ever said we would in our 97 manifesto. And I think that if that's the kind of copying the playbook, then yes, I hope that's what happens.
Just before I hand you over to Gabriel Pogrund to ask you a question, Ben Bradshaw, I just want to update listeners on an interesting development in the House of Commons, where the Speaker has suspended the sitting until 12 p.m. because Penny Mordaunt, the Commons leader, hasn't turned up to her sitting of business questions. Unclear what's going on there. Indeed, whether Penny Mordaunt is still in post, who knows? I'm sure we'll find out soon, and we'll of course bring you all the latest. Now let's get back to the business of the Labour Party. Gabriel Pogrund from the Sunday Times. What's your question to Ben Bradshaw this morning?
Ben, hi. I just wanted to ask, Patrick and I were reflecting a few moments ago on just how different the threat the Rishi Sunak poses for Keir Starmer is from Liz Truss and Boris Johnson. I mean, on the kind of key issue of the day, fiscal conservatism, balancing the books, what is Labour's message? And moreover, how does it offer one which is clear and distinctive? Because, the mood music emanating from the leadership is, we can be trusted on the economy. We'll be even more fiscally responsible than the Tories. What does that mean? How does the Labour Party do that without, in effect, consenting to a return to austerity? And what would you like to hear Keir Starmer say on that theme?
Well, I heard your earlier chat, and I actually completely agreed with your analysis. I mean, look, as I was just saying, we are going to inherit, if we win an election, a terrible economic situation, and they're going to have to be very difficult and hard choices to be made. But I think that within Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules, there's a lot more that we could do, both to boost growth and to deal with the economic problems and fiscal problems we're going to face in a fairer way than the Conservatives. And we've already given some examples of that, and you named some in your two-way with Patrick a few minutes ago. I suspect you'll see those fleshed out more. And I also think you were right when you, and actually John Curtis as well, highlighted polling that shows that the British public are not in the same place as they were post global financial crash in 2010, when they sort of accepted the need for austerity. There are large majorities in all the public opinion polls that, when asked whether they would rather see more public spending cuts or tax increases, they would prefer the latter. Obviously, if that was the case, I think Labour has some wriggle room there to go along with the grain of public opinion, but also to ensure that it's those with the broadest shoulders who carry more of the burden, and not working people who've been clobbered in the last few years, when, of course, Rishi Sunak has been in government.
And Ben, Patrick Maguire again here. How aggressive do you think it's wise or prudent for the Labour Party to be when attacking Rishi Sunak? Because as John Curtis was saying, the polling suggests that the public don't think he's in touch. But is there a risk of getting too personal if you're attacking the Prime Minister for his wealth, or is it all fair game as far as you can see?
I think it would be a mistake to do that, although I have to say, when Rishi Sunak himself tried to use that tired old joke of Keir Starmer representing a seat in North London, it's actually pretty central London, it did remind me that he has a £5.5 million home in Kensington, the largest estate in Yorkshire, and a house in California. So I'm not sure those attacks the other way around are going to work for him. But I think the public know about Rishi Sunak and his life. I don't think we need to remind them of that. No, I think it will be policy based, and I'm sure under Keir and his top team it will be policy based. You won't get any of those silly sort of class war attacks that you saw from some of Corbyn's acolytes in the years past.
Is there a danger too of the mentality of one more heave creeping back into the Labour Party? Obviously, that was a big worry of people in your wing of the party at the start of the 1992 Parliament. Would you caution colleagues who look at those polls like the ones we carry for the Times from YouGov that show 36-point leads, 39-point leads? Would you caution them not to look at those and think it's job done? Keir Starmer saying the same thing to the shadow cabinet, but do you think there is a risk people get giddy on numbers like that?
Of course, and I think the recent polls are sort of extraordinary, and in some cases are unprecedented. But I think what's really reassuring to me is, even among our membership, which has changed enormously since the Corbyn years, that our members have become much more moderate under Keir as people have left and new people have joined. I can't remember who it was, Patrick, who described being in opposition with a poll lead is like carrying a extremely valuable Ming vase across a slippery marble.
It was Roy Jenkins. Jenkins.
It was Roy Jenkins. Roy Jenkins, great hero of mine. Yes, that's exactly the attitude I think we need to take. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be radical in some ways. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be prepared to take risks on some policies. But I do think that, yes, any complacency, any idea that this is in the bag, any idea that it's just a political fact that after 10, 12 years, the public tire of the government, although I think there is to some extent that is happening. No. We've got to seal the deal. We haven't done that yet. And it could be another 2+ years, two or more years. I've perished the thought this government stumbling on that long, but it could be under our unwritten constitution. So yeah, this is still a marathon, not a sprint.
Gabriel, last word from you before we let Ben go.
I think you're quite right to note that, if a week is a long time in politics, and that has that cliche has obviously been vindicated in spectacular fashion on numerous occasions over the last 6 weeks. 2 years is an eternity, and I think it's going to be really interesting just seeing how Starmer kind of adds flesh to the bone of his policy offering and deals with Sunak, who I think is, as John Curtis said, just a formidable opponent, very different kind of politician, and far less exposed in the way that Boris Johnson and Liz Truss were on kind of uncosted spending and borrowing, which is kind of key issue of the day. So yes, I see Labour rushing in to elaborating. Fair enough. With media always want more. The public may not be as interested or deem it to be as urgent an issue, but I think the time is coming where we'll need some more answers.
Well, Gabriel Pogrund, I think
I agree with that. And can I just say one other thing? I don't think Rishi Sunak becoming Prime Minister changes the essential fact that the Conservatives are bitterly divided, and I don't see how he resolves that, because they have very different views within the party and within government about how to deal with the economic situation and what their vision for a post-Brexit Britain is. That has been unresolved. It remains unresolved, and I think, that means we can't guarantee that they will survive another 2+ years.